Hello and welcome to Chapter 2 of The Wealth of Nations, Book 3 of the Discouragement of Agriculture in the Ancient State of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Let's get to it. Disclaimer, I like this chapter, so I use lots of quotes. So get ready for lots of quotes. That's what's going to happen. So after the fall of the Roman Empire, a chaos ensued that lasted for several centuries. Commerce between the town and the country stopped. Towns were abandoned. The country was left uncultivated. And the entire society sunk into the lowest state of poverty and barbarism. Barbarism? It was Barbara. And during this time also, the ownership of the land came to be under just a handful of people called proprietors from this moment on. So while we were still under the Roman Empire, the land was being split from parents to children more evenly amongst the children, regardless of age or gender. In this new time period, after the fall of the Roman Empire, we see the Law of Primogenture, in which the land is passed just to the oldest child, if that oldest child is male. And this is because the male sex is universally preferred to the female. Shucks. And this system naturally falls into place because dividing it amongst all your children breeds the opportunity for contention and therefore instability. Whereas just having this general rule of primogeniture every single time is much more reliable, and there's not a lot of opportunity or any opportunity for contention. Laws frequently continue in force long after the circumstances which first gave occasion to them, and which could alone render them reasonable, are no more. So centuries are passing since the fall of the Roman Empire, and things are becoming much more stable. However, this law of primogeniture, which was to increase stability, is still in place. When we no longer really need it, things have settled down. But it's still in place in Europe, which Adam Smith is criticizing here. And he's criticizing it because it just favors one child, the downfall of the rest of the children. But also the more important or larger issue that every successive generation of men have not an equal right to the earth and to all that it possesses, but that the property of the present generation should be restrained and regulated according to the fancy of those who died perhaps 500 years ago. Furthermore, damage is done by the fact that just a few people own all the land, and by virtue of that circumstance, they do a pretty bad job cultivating the land, because they just have too much of it. When someone has such a great fortune and ownership, less attention is paid to the very details of the land and details that would improve profits, small profits just here and there. Whereas when it's owned by many people, they have smaller plots of land to focus on. They put much more detail and care into the small aspects of the land. Where they do improve land is, surprise, surprise, usually just the acres right around their homes. And then they leave vast swaths, the majority of it, with basically no attention and no cultivation. And the people who occupy the land, besides the proprietors, can also not be expected to contribute much to its cultivation and improvement. And these people are all basically slaves, although it is important to note that this form of slavery was significantly less brutal than that under the Greeks and the Romans, and that through the Atlantic slave trade. But if great improvements are seldom to be expected from great proprietors, they are least of all expected when they employ slaves for their workmen. The experience of all ages and nations, I believe, demonstrates that the work done by slaves, though it appears to cost only their maintenance, is in the end the dearest of any. And dearest in this case meaning most expensive. A person who can acquire no property can have no other interest but to eat as much and to labor as little as possible. Whatever work he does beyond what is sufficient to purchase his own maintenance can be squeezed out of him by violence only, and not by any interest of his own. Smith notes multiple cases in which the use of slave labor led to a decrease in the quality of output, such as in ancient Italy, or ancient Greece, and was not actually cost efficient. So you might wonder then, why do people continue slavery? To which the answer is just, unsettlingly, that people just really enjoy owning other human beings. So people want to be able to tell their workers what to do without having to ask nicely and without having to negotiate anything. And in experience, being able to do this is worth it to people to both pay more for labor and have worse quality of output. The pride of man makes him love to domineer, and nothing mortifies him so much as to be obliged to condescend to persuade his inferiors. Wherever the law allows it and the nature of the work can afford it, therefore, he will generally prefer the service of slaves to that of freemen. The planting of sugar and tobacco can afford the expense of slave cultivation. The raising of corn, it seems, in the present times, cannot. So looking at the North American colonies, you see significantly less slave labor being used comparatively in the English colonies, who were cultivating crops that could not afford slave labor as much, like corn. And circumstances that people chose to free their slaves occurred in circumstances where the enslaved people were a smaller fraction of the owner's overall property and fortune. But in colonies around the Caribbean, where they were growing huge cash crops such as sugar and tobacco, you see a larger portion of enslaved people, and because of those crops, they were able to afford having the labor be by enslaved people. So meanwhile in Europe, not the Atlantic slave trade, you see a gradual shift where people moved from being more of slaves into tenant farmer situations, in which they kept a portion of their work, but also paid the property owner a share of their income as a form of rent. And this evolution of the system did lead to improvement in the cultivation of the land and an increase in profits as well. And this new system, of course, being beneficial to both the farmer and the property owner. Smith notes that the success of this system is in large part due to laws in England which protected the tenants. For example, prevented them from being afraid of just being evicted at any time. That would be legal. And if that would be the case, having the threat of being evicted at any time, if that was a present fear, rational fear, something that could happen, it would lead to less cultivation of the land because you could be kicked off it at any time. So the laws preventing tenants lead them to have a higher degree of security. I stuttered a little bit there. A higher degree of security. And therefore, the higher degree of security led to better cultivation and, care being given to the land. Another law put in place to protect tenants is that they have no obligations that are not explicitly stated in the lease agreement. So this definitely creates even more security to go into a tenant-farmer situation, that there won't be unexpected costs or burdens that somehow make you now unprofitable. You can predict things more and therefore put more back into the land, etc. Those laws and customs so favorable to the yeomanry have perhaps contributed more to the present grandeur of England than all their boasted regulations of commerce taken together. People were also released of other previously oppressive customs, such as when the king's troops, when his household or his officers of any kind passed through any part of the country, the yeomanry were bound to provide them with horses, carriages, and provisions at a price regulated by the purveyor. Great Britain is, I believe, the only monarchy in Europe where the oppression of purveyance has been entirely abolished. It still subsists in France and Germany. Such arbitrary taking only serves to take away resources that would otherwise be put into improvement of the land. Very important, cultivation of the land. If there's any takeaway from this whole book, it's that we need to cultivate the land. So in a similar sense, the rent that the farmer has to pay to the owner of the land is also taking away from what could be used otherwise for improvement of the land. And thus the cultivation and improvement of the land under the tenant farmer is a slower moving system than if that farmer could just own that land directly. Another problem in England is that the farmers or yeomanry are viewed as being of an inferior position as opposed to other kinds of professions. Oh shit. And the subsequent movement away from those types of jobs that is occurring also leads to less cultivation of the land, which again is a bad thing. We need to cultivate the land. So while England is doing better than most other European countries, it's still not perfect either. And overall, European policy has been unfavorable to land cultivation. Smith cites overregulation with the sort of arbitrary requirement of licenses and other stupid, random, arbitrary regulations just placed on general commerce. And the decision by Smith is that this state of things is unfortunate. It has already been observed in what manner the prohibition of the exportation of corn, together with some encouragement given to the importance of foreign corn, obstructed the cultivation of ancient Italy, naturally the most fertile country in Europe, and at that time the seat of the greatest empire in the world. So there you have it, folks. That was chapter 2 out of 4 of book 3 of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much to our current Patreons. Thank you guys, and if you want to vote on like what books we do in the future, please join our Patreon and vote. Right now, we are leading with Schumpeter, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy by Joseph A. Schumpeter. So if you hate that book, then you better join the Patreon and vote for something different, because that's what it's gonna be, unless you get on that. If you like us but don't like us that much, please just leave a like or a comment below. It helps with the algorithm, and we really appreciate it, because videos take lots of time and effort, and I'm a very lazy person.